أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. One time when I was in Masjid al-Nabawi, I saw that there was a woman and she was elderly. She was maybe honestly in her 80s. She started taking a cup of Zamzam. She went and she took a cup of Zamzam and she sat down and then she started putting it on her eye and she started to cry. She was putting it on her eye and she started to make dua and she was crying as she put this Zamzam on her eye. And as I'm looking at her, watching her, I was thinking about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that speaks about drinking Zamzam is for whatever you want it for. If you drink Zamzam and your intention is that you want to find healing, you want to have a specific dua answered, then that drink is for what it is for. It's that dua. And this concept of seeking something, seeking healing in something is an action, is a gift that any of us can take with the Quran. Right now, we are witnessing a genocide that most of us have never seen the likes of before. I know many parts of our ummah have experienced different types of genocides, many genocides in our ummah. And we also have brothers and sisters in different parts of the world, Gaza, Sudan, all over this ummah. We have people who are suffering. Many of us are witnessing things we did not imagine we could see, could exist, the type of evil that could exist. And many of us are finding our hearts so broken and so devastated that we don't know how to navigate our guilt, the way that we live our lives. And what we can take from the example of that elderly grandmother who sought healing in Zamzam. We may not all have Zamzam with us, right now in this moment, but what we do have is the Quran. And there's an ayah of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the Quran easy for remembrance. Oftentimes, when we hear that ayah, it is in the space of it's easy to memorize the Quran. It's easy to constantly review the Quran. It's easy to be someone who, seeks to teach the Quran. And those are all true. Although, of course, the process of memorization and review is a journey and a process as well. It's a lot of hard work too. But there is no, book in the world that's been memorized like the Quran by people who don't even know what it means. We memorize it without even necessarily knowing the meaning of the verses. And that in and of itself is a miracle of the Quran. But there are other meanings to this ayah. And while we'll talk about different meanings, inshallah, the one I want to begin with is the idea that the Quran has been made easy for us because its wisdoms are applicable to every circumstance in our lives. That when we're going through any type of hardship, when we are watching our ummah go through hardship, that it's very easy for any of us to take a hot shower and then to make some hot tea and to sit and scroll on social media and see the horrors of what we are seeing and then say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. How is this possible? And feel so helpless. And I've heard people take that further and say, why isn't this stopping? Why isn't Allah stopping it? And may Allah have mercy on all of us. I know many people have asked that question. But I want us to look at what they are saying there in Gaza, specifically what we are witnessing. They are actually turning to the Quran. Their reaction in the moment is not to question, of course, it's to question our reaction. It's to question governments. It's to question all things related to what our responsibility towards them is. But what are they doing in the moment? They are the embodiment of the concept of the Quran being what you seek it for. Because the Quran is what you seek it for. And one of the meanings of this verse that so many scholars have discussed, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the Quran has been made easy for you, It's been made easy for you to apply for your intention of what you seek in life. When you seek healing for your mind or your soul or your body, when you seek bringing your family close together, when you seek justice and you seek I don't I'm at a loss of words in trying to describe Gaza. But when you seek the freedom of an oppressed people, then the Quran is what you seek it for. Now, when they are in a circumstance like this, obviously they are not have never asked to be in that circumstance. We are not taking them as a master class on faith on what to do when you are being genocided. Astaghfirullah, a'udhu billah, Allah yahmina wa yahmihim jami'an. And one of my friends advised me and said, be very careful in the way you speak about the Palestinian faith because, yes, it's so strong, but we also don't want to take them as these, these heroes, which they are, in the sense of we should be inspired by them, which we are. But at the same time, they're being forced to go through genocide. However, despite that, their reaction is number one, there was a story of a martyr who was in a hospital. And while they took a paper out of the pocket of this martyr, they saw that it was Surah al-Buruj, the first page of Surah al-Buruj. And that paper had blood on it. It was just tattered. And the people holding it up in the video said, this is a message from Allah through the martyrs to us. That Surah al-Buruj, for any of you that are familiar, is a surah that speaks about people who are murdered because of their faith. They are murdered because of who they are. So Surah al-Buruj, in this promise of paradise, when they are going through this level of horrifying terrorism, that subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving them hope in the process of this. That is how they took this verse. I'm sure you've seen this surah. I'm sure you've seen images of people who are reciting the Quran. For example, a young boy whose head had a wound. There's no anesthesia or any medication. So he is reciting the Quran as he's being stitched. There's another one of a young boy whose arm was injured. These are young boys. They're probably 10, maybe 12 at the most. And his arm was injured and he had no medication. There's no medication in Gaza. And so he's reciting the Quran as the medic is tending to his arm. We have a young girl. She was maybe 5 or 6, and she had been so affected by the level of horror that she was no longer speaking. She just stopped speaking. And so her mother was teaching her Quran through sign language. Subhanallah, over and over, we are just seeing one story after another of young people. Like if you saw a video of a brother and sister, the sister was maybe 5 and the brother was like 8, and they were memorizing Quran together and reviewing Quran together as they were displaced from their home. They've made some of the tent areas that they are forced to stay in, areas where their children are coming together, and mothers or individuals who are adults in the area are teaching them Quran. We are seeing a deep connection to Quran to get them through what is a horror no one should experience, should be forced to experience. And yet, the fact that the Quran is this lifeline for them is an example for all of us that no matter what circumstance you are going through, to seek that ease that the Quran talks about with it, that in any circumstance, it's always applicable to you. The scholars talk about different meanings for this verse. One of them, like I referenced, it's just the general memorization, the miracle that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's miracle was the Quran. Of course, he had other miracles, like when the moon split. But it's interesting because this ayah comes in the surah that talks about the moon splitting. Surah al-Qamar is the ayah that talks about the moon splitting. And this ayah is mentioned in that surah, and that was a miracle. And the miracle of the Quran is that it is so easy for people in so many different ways. Another benefit of this verse that the scholars mention is that in addition to the fact that we talked about its wisdom being applicable to our lives, is that there's no time that you read an ayah and say, oh, I totally understand that ayah now. There will always be a moment where you will hear the ayah at a different time in your life and say, SubhanAllah, I never thought about it that way. I am amazed that I've recited this verse 50 times so far. And I never had this connection with this verse or never had this concept with this verse until this moment. And in the comments, if you can share an ayah where that has happened to you, I'm sure many of us have had that experience where we've read an ayah or read a surah and we've read it so many times, and then suddenly we come back to it and subhanAllah, it is a completely different meaning because our circumstance in life is different. And in the example of Surah Al-Buruj that I just mentioned, that this was messages from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the martyrs to the people. I know so many people who saw that video and they reconnected to Surah Al-Buruj in a way that they had never connected before. I memorized Surah Al-Buruj when I was a child, like many of you may have memorized it, Sunday school or Islamic school or just with, any program, maybe many or some of you have been in when you were a child. And I love the surah. I mean, it's surah of the Quran, but I can't say I have actively held on to that surah as like the one surah I deeply, deeply think about and process. And I wish I could say I have, but it hasn't been one of the ones I have deeply researched in my life yet. Inshallah, I pray I'll get the opportunity to. But now, after seeing that video, and with the heartache and the loss and the heartbreak of what we are witnessing in Gaza, I started reciting it over and over and over. And the reason I started reciting it is because I felt like closer to the people who are going through this. If they are taking Surah Al-Buruj as a means of hope and hanging on of this wa'tasimu bihablillah, that they are holding on to this rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what about us? And I shared that reflection with a friend of mine. And she said, subhanAllah, she saw that video. And for the past month and a half, she's been listening to the tafsir of Surah Al-Buruj. She's been reading the verse in translation. She's been trying to understand Surah Al-Buruj. I shared that same thought with another friend, and she said the same thing. I shared that thought with others, and others replied in the same way. That Surah Al-Buruj is the surah that they keep on reciting and trying to understand and trying to grow closer to because it is helping them process Gaza because of what they've seen from the people of Gaza and Surah Al-Buruj. And subhanallah, I had the privilege, it's just a privilege, alhamdulillah, of being in Medina about a month ago. And I was in Medina, and when we first got in, I made dua, and the dua that I made was, Ya Allah, you know how many of us are here brokenhearted for this ummah, and just praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about Gaza, just praying about our ummah in general and Gaza specifically. I had just gotten out of the train station so there's you go from Jeddah to Medina by train, and I was sitting, we were waiting for a taxi to come and take us to Masjid al-Nabawi. So I was making this dua about Gaza and constantly thinking about Gaza. And then, so of course, like all of us, our hearts are just overwhelmed. SubhanAllah, that night, I was unable to actually attend Salat al-Isha in person. I was in the hotel room. And so I was in the hotel room because of a circumstance that I was there, and I was listening to the recitation through the loudspeaker and just thinking, SubhanAllah, I wish that I could be praying right now in the street, just in the Masjid al-Nabawi, but also just this overwhelming sadness for the ummah. And the salah, subhanAllah, began, and the Imam recited Surah Al-Fatiha, and then he recited Surah Al-Buruj. And just like our beloved sister or brother Helmsman Packer just mentioned, may Allah bless you, Helmsman Packer, brother, or maybe sister, our beloved sibling in faith, that this person says, I am currently trying to memorize this surah. Jazakallah khair for this suiting my circumstances. All of us have these moments with Quran whenever we seek it. That right now, our discussion is really talking about Surah al-Qamar, the ayah in Surah al-Qamar, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made these verses easy. But there's a whole side discussion on Surah al-Buruj in connection to Surah al-Qamar, or to the ayah in Surah al-Qamar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows you are memorizing that surah. And Allah knows who else in this discussion has had the connection of Surah Al-Buruj, or who has watched that video and has been connecting Surah Al-Buruj. And Allah knew how many people there in Medina needed Surah Al-Buruj For me, it felt like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is witnessing and seeing and listening, and He promises us that He sees those who are wrongdoers, that He sees the oppressors, that there is a day where they will see horrors, that their hearts will go up into their throats. And we know that that is the truth of the Quran. And so many of us have never found comfort in the concept of hellfire like we do now. And all of that being said, right now, if we are feeling overwhelmed with one, life in general, because one of our sisters here, a brother, sorry, Munib, you mentioned that you're on your way to daily radiation treatment, about a third through combo radiation and chemo. May Allah bless you, brother Munib, and bless you with a complete healing and a complete shifa, stronger health than you've ever been through before, ever had before, and bless you with many years of so much energy and health to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and support your family and your community in every good way. Ameen. And bless your family and everyone here who has any type of physical ailment. This concept of when you are seeking the Quran to comfort you is one that our scholars teach us. When you are seeking the Quran for ease, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ, it's not just that Allah has made it easy for you to memorize. It's easy for you to bring into your life in every circumstance. One of my teachers, one time I was very sick and I couldn't do my review, and I called him and said, Sheikh Mohib, I'm so sick. I can't even recite my throat. And he could hear my voice was so hoarse. And he said, don't worry, just make the intention that when you are going to recite the Quran, recite it for shifa, recite it for healing. Another one of my teachers told me, no, when you seek the Quran and you are seeking it for anything, really, you're seeking it to bring joy to your family, you are seeking it to ask for Allah to mend your heart, when you are seeking it just to understand it and learn it, make the intention that you're going to do good for the Quran. وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the Quran easy for you, but He's also made it a means of ease for you to do good. And so when you intend that you're going to give charity and you ask Allah to make you successful in the Quran, or you tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're going to change your baby's diaper and you ask Allah to make it a blessing and a means of reward and to help your Quran, the actions that you do, the ease in which you change your perspective and your intention is a reflection of the ease and the miracle of the Quran. And that being said, something that many of us are unaware of is that the Quran is a healing for every circumstance, and it can be mastered. It can be mastered by people in any circumstance. We have the qira'at of the Quran. These are different types of recitations of the Quran. We're not going to get into the qira'at today, but we have different types of recitation. You may be hearing someone recite from Morocco and think, oh, they made all of these mistakes. But it's because Morocco typically recites in warsh. They don't recite in hafs, which is something we're more used to hearing. And two of the scholars, the imams of the qira'at, who the qira'ah is named after, were those with disabilities. We have one who was blind. This is the name of this qari. SubhanAllah, I'm so sorry that I suddenly forgot it, and I'm Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Okay, Abu Amr ibn al-A'la, and he was blind, and Duri and As-Susi are the recitations that he is known for. And there's another reciter that we have, Imam Qalun, and Imam Qalun was deaf. Now, it's not that he was an amazing reciter and that's why we remember him. His recitation is actually one of the qira'at, like we take his qira'at, we say, I don't know how to explain this very well, but he's not like a great scholar. He is like the scholar of his qira'at. We name a qira'at after Imam Qalun, and he was deaf. The Quran is heard. And what he would do is put his eyes, he would just watch so closely to see the way that someone's mouth would move. In another narration, I heard that he would feel the vibrations of the floor, that there were different ways that he would so actively interact with the Quran And not only did he become a general teacher of the Quran, which is amazing for anybody at all, but he's the actual one the qira'ah is after. So we have in our history, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Is there anyone who will be mindful that someone who is deaf can be the top scholar of Quran? That if the Quran is applicable in every single person's life and every single person's circumstance, then why is it sometimes we don't feel like it's enough for our healing? Why is it sometimes that we struggle with finding answers that we are looking for in the Quran when it comes to the way that we navigate a very difficult trial on our ummah? And that's understandable. When we talk about the level of trial right now, again, many of us are witnessing for the first time ever genocide being televised. It's being broadcast. And something that is important for us to recognize is that when we are saying questions or hearing questions of people who say, and may Allah forgive me for saying this, why isn't Allah stopping them? They are making dua, oh Allah, stop it. Oh Allah, protect them. Oh Allah, finish it. They're making that dua, yes. And why are they making that dua? Because they have certainty in Allah's names and attributes. They are making that dua because they feel helpless. They feel so helpless, and so they call to the one who is all powerful. It's an affirmation of the names and attributes of Allah, that Allah is all powerful, that Allah is all knowing, Allah is all hearing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do what I cannot do, what you cannot, none of us can do. And so in that affirmation, in that question, is actually an affirmation that I believe that Allah can. And with the Quran, what we need to do is reframe. It's easy for us to be outside of a genocide saying, why isn't it happening? What are they saying? They are turning to the Quran. So it's an opportunity for us to turn to the Quran too.